Welcome to Paratruth. What's up, everybody, and welcome to Paratruth Reborn. This is a pre-recorded show on 107.7 FM New Orleans and United Public Radio Network. My name is Eric.
And I'm Justin.
And today with us, Cristina Gomez. Cristina is a UFO and paranormal researcher, podcaster, journalist, and content creator with a BA in communications. She presents lively and fascinating video content, which is also available in audio podcast format, focused on the topics of UFOs, extraterrestrials, the UFO disclosure efforts, as well as many aspects of the paranormal and fringe sciences. Cristina does extensive research into the topics that are discussed and interviews guests with a genuine, passionate curiosity in an effort to bring news, updates, and research information to her audience. Ranges from high schoolers, students, all the way through to older audiences. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, here is Cristina Gomez.
Cristina, welcome to Paratruth Reborn. How's it going?
Hi, Justin. Hi, Eric. I'm doing so well. How are you guys?
Awesome.
Doing great.
So I heard you on Jim Harold's paranormal podcast and thought you were super knowledgeable. So I checked out your YouTube channel. Loved the content that you got going on there, so I wanted to bring you on. First thing I wanted to ask you, and I'm sure you asked this to all your guests too, how did you get started in this, and why did you start a YouTube channel?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to speak to Jim. He's such a fun guy, and his content is amazing. How I started, like many of us, it happens when you're really young. I was surrounded by weird parents. I grew up on the Twilight Zone. And that's really what got me started. I grew up in the library, and my best friend was a librarian who was like in her 60s. And, we would have conversations like this. And so for myself, I originally started doing the research publicly, doing it on YouTube, making podcasts, because at the time I had just entered university and I had a lot of free time in my hands. I don't have that anymore. I have no time. I'm an insomniac now. But I thought to myself, there's so much I want to know and understand. I can't be the only one asking these questions, being curious about this topic. Why not make it public and allow other people to join the ride? The UFO phenomenon, in my opinion, is one of the most important conversations that humanity is having right now, in the sense of, let's step back just a little bit. In order to traverse space and the universe, we have to have a basic knowledge of other civilizations outside of planet Earth. And if we get a good understanding of that, looking at the mere history of UFO sightings that have taken place here on Earth, that's a great start. And on top of that, universities and community colleges are now offering UFO classes, like Michigan University, Portland Community College, A&M as well in Texas. That's just a handful. And I think at some point, these knowing about UFOs, about the UFO history and how it's going to help us in the future, they're going to be mandatory classes for a handful of degrees once we get a better understanding of how to properly explore our galaxy and our universe.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you say you grew up on the Twilight Zone, because Justin and I grew up on similar stuff. I was on the X-Files growing up. It was like a Wednesday night family thing. My parents would always sit us down to watch these basically horror films back then. And so, we kind of grew up doing the same thing, always looking up to the sky, whether or not they exist, and what other creature entities exist within this universe. So I find that really fascinating. But, there have been a number of different reported sightings over the past several years now, and it seems like these sightings are becoming more and more common as we progress in time here. In fact, there have been more UFO videos and photos taken more than any other time before. What are your current thoughts on why we are actually seeing more UFOs as we progress into 2025?
I don't know if we're seeing more UFOs, but now that we have access to the internet and social media, and as soon as someone sees it, they post it, the whole world is able to just kind of like jump on that information. But when we look at cases from the 60s and 70s, that was a really prominent time for reported UFO sightings globally. And that was where I think some of the best research was done. Now, in today's world, it's so easy to create CGI and fake videos and to create this hype on something that isn't there. There was this YouTuber, and his name escapes me, but he was in Florida and he created a whole fake alien invasion. It went absolutely viral, and half the people believed it and the other half didn't. I ended up watching his video on how he did the whole thing, and I was really surprised. And it's because we have the technology and the internet today that we're able to do things like that more so than a few decades ago. But are we seeing more? I think people are just more open to report the sightings that they're having because the stigma is slowly reducing itself compared again to just a few decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's fascinating that this guy did it on YouTube when Orson Welles did War of the Worlds on a radio and convinced everybody of it.
No, that's absolutely true. And that's such a great example of that, especially when that was for CBS, right? Or was it BBC?
I think
Either
it was
way.
CBS.
I think that was, yeah.
It was CBS. Yeah. So when Orson Welles did that, there have been a lot of comments on that particular report that he did on World of Worlds, where he was just reading that amazing novel. And one of the big reasons to why it took off and people believed it was because CBS during that time frame was a place to get your news. It was a trusted source. Why would you goof around, right? That was the mentality for a lot of these people that were tuning in during that time. And when we think about it today, we're like, oh my gosh, how could those people be so dumb? How did they not know it was a real thing? Times have changed. They didn't have access to the internet. Many people didn't even read that incredible book, War of the Worlds. Say that 3 times fast. It's pretty difficult. But that's a really fantastic example, and we're still seeing that today.
Yeah. Something that just recently happened end of last year, and I know you've done some videos on it, and it's still fascinating me because we're not hearing anything about it anymore now that a certain person is in office. But we had the drones flying around New Jersey. We had other types of drones flying around other parts of the world. We had orbs flying around and attacking these drones, supposedly. What is your take on this, and why aren't we hearing anything about it now?
It's a complex subject, and I'll definitely give a breakdown and a timeline for this. They're still being seen today. They're just not being reported at the same rate because of other things that are taking up the news. It's the news cycle kind of deal. But when we're looking at these objects that were seen in New Jersey, it's lame. I think it's the word I want to use. It's lame to call them drones because, in my opinion, it's a form of conditioning. It's the new swamp gas. It's the new, you're just following Venus, I don't know why they sound like that, but they do in my head. But when we're looking at these objects that have been seen, it's not just in New Jersey, but also in Philadelphia, and also very prevalently in New York, in and around the Hudson Valley. And that place is notorious because they have had their UFO flaps for decades, where UFOs are seen for a handful of days or weeks, and then it subsides, and then it happens again. It goes up and down, every few years there are these sightings. And it's interesting that they were seen over the last few months during the same time that these mysterious drones are also being seen. Now, there have been a lot of conclusions as to what they are, but from the research that I've done looking at UFO sighting history, it's definitely following the framework as the Roswell incident, where when the news came out the next day of, oh my gosh, it's a flying saucer, to wait, no, it's actually a weather balloon, to decades later of, actually, guys, it's Project Mogul. We couldn't tell you because it was classified, but now it's not. The same thing happened with the New Jersey drones. And I get that if you haven't been following it since the beginning, it's kind of confusing to follow that path, but I've been looking at it since the day it came out, and there have been a lot of flaws in the reports that have been given. So when we look at the articles and how the media has been approaching this, they're like, guys, it's mysterious drones. And that was very quickly the label that was placed. If we back up just a few years, in December of 2019 into January of 2020, mysterious drones were also seen in Colorado for several weeks. The sheriff's department got involved and they were like, we have no idea what this is, but please don't shoot them down. The FAA and the FBI also got involved in Colorado, and they gave no explanation as to what they were. The exact same thing happened just a few months ago, where the FBI, the FAA, the Pentagon, and all these other departments got involved. And they said, oh, we don't know what they are. There was a drone hearing in December. And they're like, we don't know what they are. And then December 17th comes along, and then we receive an official report of, guys, actually, it's just the military. They're just hobbyist balloons, drones, and hobbyists, people just getting excited, flying these around. But why didn't you say that just a few weeks prior? And then the story adds on to, actually, it's the military conducting some tests, doing these drone type of incursions to see how it's all coming along. Again, if I just label it like that, back to back to back, it's following the Roswell blueprint. But it doesn't explain the same or similar sightings that have been seen in England, in Germany, and in the Netherlands, just to name a few countries of where we have received the reports here in the United States during the same time frame as well. And when we look at the Netherlands in particular, their form of the FBI called the PET did an investigation. The people there were nervous. They're like, what's going on? We have no answers. The PET never gave their people an answer. Now, here in the States, we have the conclusion of it's just military and hobbyist drones. But some people have mentioned that they have seen these objects shapeshift, which is a common phenomenon when it comes to UFO sightings. And also, some people have attempted to fly their drones to get close to these other objects in the sky, and their batteries would immediately drain out. Usually, for anyone that flies a drone, you know your battery lasts anywhere from 35 to maybe 55 minutes, right? It's like along that kind of time frame. But for a battery to be fully charged and then just discharge immediately is shocking. On top of that, the local sheriff's department in New Jersey have said that this is an absolute threat. We don't know what they are. We're not allowed to shoot these down. The FBI isn't helping us. The military isn't helping us. We don't have the proper interception technology to take down these alleged drones. So they are a threat. And the sheriff's department, after we got the answer from the FBI and the FAA of like, hey guys, it's just the military, New Jersey, they were like, that's not what my men are seeing. One of the sheriffs gave an interview to News Nation about a month or 2 months ago where he stated that his men, those on the job police officers, had mentioned they saw more than a dozen drones come out of the water. And that was very strange. And so if this is all just fun military testing, it's unfortunate that they can't and won't tell the American people. But let me also mention this. New Jersey is a very interesting state. It has a lot of military bases, and also it has one of about 3 or 4 Lockheed Martin departments that specialize in drone equipment. One of them is also in Colorado, where they had their sighting in 2019 and 2020, and another one in California. That is something to add to this mix. So there's this hypothesis that what people are seeing in the sky some of them might be military testing, they might be ours, humans, and some of them might not be. But this story has been unfolding in such a way that even congressmen from the United States are like, we want answers. We don't know what's going on. One mentioned that it was an Iranian mothership because someone told him it was. And that was strange to say out loud in the public.
Yeah, that
And
was a
there's also
little
been-
hilarious when the senator came out like that, and I'm like, Iranian mothership. Those two words together don't make any sense because the U.S. doesn't even have that that type of technologies. So
it was very shocking, and that took off. But also, right before the switch of administrations, during the Biden administration, his Pentagon spokesman, such as Sabrina Singh and Mr. Kirby as well, they said it's not ours and it's not foreign adversary. So that kind of opened the door of, okay, what is it? Then the new administration comes in, and Pentagon spokesman Caroline Leavitt said, and she ends her 30-second answer of, they are not the enemy. And that shocked me. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Can you go into more explanation as to what you think it is? Now, there have been a lot of comments on this since the new administration, one of them being from the new UFO whistleblower, Jake Barber, who had made a tweet right after that statement by Miss Leavitt. And he said, no, there's something really strange going on. I know people on the inside and they're not ours. So it's like, who do we believe? Where are we looking? And I think that level of confusion and all these different narratives and conclusions kind of deflates people to where they don't want to follow the topic anymore. And maybe that's the idea that is attempted to be pushed out there publicly of like, we're going to confuse you as much as possible so that you no longer care about what's going on in New Jersey and the entire East Coast and actually globally.
Right. Well, I find it most fascinating that our government just simply thinks that Americans are idiots and are at some point going to just believe anything they say and walk away from it. And then perhaps you're right. Maybe they're just trying to make circles around us and get us confused and hopefully let us force us to kind of drop it until the next wave shows up. Either way, for me personally, I see with all these different whistleblowers, all these different ideas of what these things are, all it's telling me is nobody really knows what it is, but the most likely the government and military do, and they're trying to keep it under wrap for whatever reason, because I think it's only a matter of time before this stuff just kind of blows up and we're seeing what the truth is. It'll show itself to us. So why they're trying to keep it under wraps still, I don't know. But one other thing is, like, I've noticed a lot of reports where whenever a military base is working on some sort of experimentation, some experimental aircraft, we always tend to see some sort of other unidentified craft circling it or coming around the same area, orbs that are kind of appearing and disappearing while these craft are in the sky, almost as if something is coming and trying to watch what's happening. And I find that also really interesting. And of course, there's been plenty of speculation like these are other drones that the military are putting up to kind of have extra footage of whatever these experiment crafts are. But of course, a lot of people think, well, these are just this is technology that belongs to whoever is flying these UFOs, these spacecraft possibly, and they're just making sure that the thing is working properly, or maybe making sure that we're not a huge threat, because they themselves are still much higher than us and stronger, and they're trying to keep the field level.
It is always exciting to watch a child play with Legos and see what they create, see how far their engineering goes and their imagination goes. could we apply that same mentality to these unknown craft being seen in the sky that aren't operated by humans? Of just like this interest of what are they going to do next? What are they going to do? How is it going to turn out? Should we be worried? It's also a very important question. Because there have been a lot of reports of UFO sightings around nuclear facilities. Some of the most famous ones being the Malmstrom Air Force Base, the Vandenberg Air Force Base, Rendlesham in England, right? We are now receiving information over the last few years that Roswell had like nuclear weapons in its area as well. And that's just a few out of many to name. There was a recent report, recent as in like last year, there were sightings of UFOs over nuclear facilities in India. It was reported to the Indian government, and they said, I don't really know what to tell you, but don't think about it too much. And then that story died really quick. But these things are being seen internationally across nuclear facilities, and could it just be just a kind of watch to make sure that we don't destroy ourselves? And why? Like, genuinely, why do they care? Do they have investments here on planet Earth? Are they mining resources? Are we the resources? There are so many different theories. I don't have the answers to those, but it is not only interesting to muse about, but also important to muse about as well, because that will lead us, hopefully, to the right answers.
Right. Well, now, one thing I did want to kind of jump into, we're going to kind of veer off track a little bit, but you just recently had a guest on who is a Bigfoot and Dogman researcher, who said that he feels there's no real correlation between Bigfoot and UFOs. However, there have been plenty of individuals who claim otherwise. And I know Justin and I have had a couple of individuals on who have claimed that Bigfoot is indeed an extraterrestrial or an interdimensional being, and they come and go on various types of aircraft. What are just your overall thoughts on that, and where do you place the whole Bigfoot?
There's definitely a connection between UFOs, the paranormal, and cryptids. I just had a shock there. I'm sorry. But I have heard a lot of theories and a lot of stories of people seeing Bigfoot in the forest and then soon after seeing a UFO sighting or vice versa. There have also been reports to bring in the paranormal of someone having a UFO sighting and then strange things happening in their home and vice versa, of course. So there is that connection there. And I think we need to ask ourselves, is it the labels that are confusing us? Are we looking at the exact same phenomenon, but because of our culture and our environment, we are labeling them as all of these different things when in reality they could be one and the same? It's like when we talk about angels and demons, because they didn't originate here on Earth, they are aliens.
Right.
They're interdimensionals, right? And I know that upsets some people, but that's just one thing to consider. When we're looking at Bigfoot, for instance, there have been theories that have definitely caught my attention that they are these kinds of slaves for these aliens. For instance, like the praying mantis from the stories that I've come across, that kind of like they do their evil bidding kind of deal. I would love to see that with my own eyes, because while we all enjoy a good story and a good witness testimony, all of us want the evidence in our hands or to experience it for ourselves. I haven't seen that. So, of course, a little skeptical, as we should be. We should be asking questions all the time. But there does seem to be a connection between Bigfoot and the UFO phenomenon.
Okay.
So something that has fascinated me about UFOs since we've started this journey of being paranormal investigators is the whistleblowers like Bob Lazar, the several gentlemen that addressed Congress last year. But there's always been this talk that we have UFOs, or I'm sorry, ETs in contact with our government and governments throughout the world. What are your thoughts on that?
One of the most famous stories to complement that statement, Justin, is the Eisenhower Treaty. So Eisenhower allegedly had a meeting with hook-nosed greys. It's been reported, one of them by one of the most famous UFO researchers, Jacques Vallée, where Eisenhower, during his presidency, signed a treaty where he said, give us advanced technology. In return, you can abduct people and cattle for this amazing tech that you're willing to give us, right? That's probably one of the biggest stories that set a basis for that idea that international militaries and government are working alongside extraterrestrials. And of course, there have been reports like the Dulce Base incident where Phil Schneider, it's Phil Schneider, right? I always get Phil Schneider and Dan Schneider confused, and it like really messes me up, but I believe it's Phil Schneider. He was working for the Dulce Base, and he allegedly, there was this war between human scientists and aliens. And the story goes that they are in this kind of almost this level of allegiance, like reptilians and alien greys, where they're working alongside each other, doing experimentation in an area in New Mexico. And it was caught on by Paul Benowitz, who was like, I need to tell this information to the world. Richard Doty gets involved. He's very famous because he was one of the disinformation agents who now does all the conferences and all the interviews. And he was like, I used to be a disinformation agent. We give you 70% truth, 30% lies. Figure it out for yourself. Well, he was pretty brutal during his time working as a disinfo agent. So much so that he caused Paul Benowitz to go crazy and to be institutionalized and then passing away soon after. Phil Schneider was another one who allegedly took his own life after he had spoken out about the Dulce Base and all the things that he encountered. That's a pretty messy story, to say the least, but there are a handful of cases and reports of where government and extraterrestrials are working hand in hand for some kind of common purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we kind of touched base on this a little bit when we talked about Bigfoot and even talked about angels and demons and interdimensional beings. But, in today's age, we really think of UFOs as being extraterrestrial or, not of this world in origin, and that these craft are seemingly controlled by alien species, whether it is the Greys, the Reptilians, or even the Nordics or any other species for that matter. But there are, of course, plenty of stories from ancient civilization claim similar stories, what we're witnessing today. However, they've been attributed to entities like the Fae. How do we attribute the Fae to the modern interpretation of alien species? And could it be one and the same, or could the Fae just simply be creating some sort of illusion to make us believe it's these Greys, reptilians, whatever, and they may not really exist at all?
I think it's down to labels. But that was a great question. I like the description that you gave as well. It's definitely food for thought. Yeah, like my brain's eating some snacks. If we look at the Fae, which is great folklore, that's mainly across Europe. But if we look at all ancient cultures, there is a constant theme of people being visited by non-human entities. We can look at the Native Americans in the United States, where they believe that they are like star children. They came from the stars or from the ant people is another one. Portals are very prevalent. If we look at Australia, okay, they have there that look like alien greys, ginormous eyes, huge heads, kind of lanky looking. We can also look at parts of Asia as well. Vietnam is one of them. Japan is another, just to name a few. the entire continent of Africa into the Middle East. We can look at that. There's this consistent theme that humans have been visited by a very intelligent and in many cases, a very kind entity to usually assist the people, to visit the people, sometimes take things, but our ancestors believed them to be this form of God, to where it's okay, they can take whatever they want because it's not really ours. They gave it to us. So when we look at the Fae, for instance, where they're a little bit more mischievous from the cases that I come across, especially the one in England. I believe it was in Cornwall, where this little girl, I think it was in the 1500s. I think it was in the 1500s. The story goes that she saw what she classified as like a fairy. They abducted her, brought her into this beautiful, majestic kingdom, and a while later, she comes back down. She tells the world what happened, her world, right? Guys, the fairy took me. They took me to this beautiful, like this just amazing, majestic craft, moving object. Today we would call a craft, right? And it was incredible. No one believed her in Cornwall. But when we look at these cases today with these eyes of knowing what patterns to look for and taking off the labels, it sounds very much like an alien abduction. But in this case for her, it was a more pleasant experience. It's not the more terrifying ones that we hear today, but it's a consistent theme. We've seen it throughout history.
I find it interesting that she had a pleasant experience because we have come across quite a few individuals who've had experience both had pleasantries with alien entities, if you will, and who've also been harmed in many ways, just depending on what species, I guess, abducted them. In fact, we know of one woman in particular who claims she's abducted on a regular basis and she enjoys time with them. They take her out into space. They let her fly spaceships, stuff like that. But then we have others who are like, they marked up. They stuck me with needles. They did all these biopsies, things like that. So, I'm thinking back to how possibly the Greys and reptilians could be working together. But then on the flip side, we had these two very contrasting abduction scenarios. I don't know if this could possibly be the same entities, just for whatever reason, choosing some people to treat well and others to do more harsh experimentation on, or if these are two different entities that trying to battle in some way for the understanding and even the rights of humanity. One trying to lift up and learn about us, while the other one is trying to learn about us in hopes of maybe destroying or even building something better.
We definitely can't place all of our eggs in one basket. It does seem, merely from the stories that we have collected over the decades, that we're dealing with different entities with different agendas and different levels of compassion, maybe. And let me provide you some examples. So when we look at the Travis Walton incident, one of the most famous alien abductions. Travis Walton in November 1975, he thought that he was just being tortured by these entities while he was logging, in Snowflake, Arizona. Years passed, and he began to really reflect on his encounter. And he thought, I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I was merely a casualty. This craft was trying to go back up into the sky, and he was caught in the crossfire. So the entities took him on and tried to heal him and remove any of the injuries that they had caused. That took maturity for Travis Walton, and also this level of just kind of like simmering in the memory juices of like, okay, what really happened? Of course, it scared me in 1975 when I was in my 20s. It was the worst experience. But then decades pass, and he's like, maybe not. Then when we look at another case, a UFO flap in Colares, Brazil in 1977, one of my all-time favorite cases, where these people in a small fishing town saw craft in the sky every single day without fail for 6 months. But these craft were terrorizing the people, so much so that the people in that area called them chupa chupa or sucker sucker because they believed that when these beams of light would come down, it would take some of their blood because there were puncture wounds for people in the jugular area and in the chest area. This was recorded and reported by the Brazilian military. Operação Plato came in when the mayor of Colares called the capital and he's like, you need to protect my people. They're being terrorized by these craft in the sky. And so the military comes in, and instead of bringing weapons and artillery, they brought telescopes, paper, pencils, and cameras to document the phenomenon. We ended up receiving a FOIA report in the early 2000s, thanks to ufologist A.J. Javares, who just recently passed away. But those thousands of reports, now we have a few hundred witness testimony, a lot of drawings, and a few photographs, but it's believed that there are thousands of witness testimony, hundreds of hours of videos, and a few thousand photographs that are still in the archives in the Brazilian government. In that case, people did not see these craft and these entities as something positive. They were very almost what they would probably classify 1977 in this very religious town as demonic, as being terrorized by demons. There are so many different cases of some people having positive experiences where, like you had mentioned, Eric, where they're having a good time on the craft, seeing the universe, chatting it up, right? And others where they don't have good intentions. And those are just merely two examples of a lot of reports that we have collected over the decades.
Right. I find the description of the Brazil case of the puncture wounds in the jugular and the chest, they seemingly line up a lot with vampiric stories as well, in which people encounter vampires and are supposedly bitten on the neck or on the chest as well. So now we're getting to a completely different type of entity in this case. Some argue that the vampire is simply a spirit being that happens to patrol the night and draws energy from people, while others do believe it to be much more of a monstrous creature that literally does bite and draw blood. And in fact, we can even consider the chupacabra as one of these creatures as well, especially if the chupacabra is actually an alien entity, as some have claimed it has been. I mean, how do we start to differentiate from the historical evidence of something like the vampire or the chupacabra versus the modern evidence of these extraterrestrial spacecraft and beings that are kind of doing the same type of harm that we've witnessed in these other accounts with these other beings? I mean, are we going to say that they're exactly one and the same creature that's just taking on two different forms here? Or are these just two entities that happen to be doing the same sort of feeding in the same way, if you will?
Or what if they're copycatting?
Well, they're copycatting.
I don't
That's
know.
a good
I
one
don't
too.
know.
That's a good one too. You never know. It's crazy because, you know, and then we're also thinking, I mean, how many times we've talked about the Nimbulum as well when we talk about angels and demons and the biblical aspect of extraterrestrials. You know, I was a firm believer that maybe I am a firm believer actually that the Nephilim, which is, you know, when fallen angels came down and laid with women, created these half human, half angelic hybrids, which were renowned as heroes of men. They were supposedly giants and strong and capable of many more things than what humans could. And they had wisdom beyond anything on Earth at the time. That there's this possibility, though, that they created craft of some sort here on Earth prior to the flood of Noah's flood and took off into the atmosphere, into space, to prevent own demise. And now that's what we're seeing on a daily or on a regular basis in these videos and evidences is these beings that are half spiritual and half human that keep coming and going and still doing the thing that they've always been doing since ancient times.
There's so much weird stuff happening here. It's hard to stay up to date and to really know all of these different entities, the paranormal, the UFOs, the cryptid. I think that our world is so much more mysterious than what we give it credit for. We've definitely lost that touch over the last, I'd probably say 100 years. Our ancestors were so deeply in tune with nature and sharing stories, cultural stories from hundreds of years prior to their own. And we've lost that. We tried to explain everything away scientifically, or if we can't explain it, that it doesn't exist. We do not give our world enough credit for all the strange things that happen. And we're kind of getting into that now with TV shows like Skinwalker Ranch and Blind Frog Ranch. And while, yes, they are television shows aimed for entertainment, they're also highlighting areas right here on our planet where you have an amalgam of all the strangeness of UFO sightings, of shadow people, of cryptids, of portals, so on and so forth. And these areas, these hotspots, are also that we know of in parts of Romania, in parts of Japan. We can think about the Bermuda Triangle. We can think about the triangle off of Japan, the Dragon's Triangle. There are just these strange areas that the veil is so thin, where we have our world, the physical world, and this other one that's just trying to push through. When we look at folklore and different myths and legends from everywhere, we hear a constant of things like fairies, right? Of things of like these kind of shadow creatures, these kinds of cryptid like creatures. One of my favorite is the Snallygaster here from the United States. But I don't know what it is, why there are certain very energetic areas. But in those areas, that's where all the strangeness lies. And I think that's what opens a lot of people's minds, that it's not, life isn't just about your 9 to 5, paying your bills and then watching television to numb the mind. If you just go out or just do a little bit of reading and researching, the world out there is so beautiful, and it also taps into our childlike imagination. When so many of us were kids, we believed in those things, of the dragons and unicorns and fairies, hoping to see it for ourselves, to live in that kind of fantasy world. But what if it is true and we just can't see because maybe it's not in our frequency? Or it existed, but it no longer does due to some sort of evolution of some kind. I think that if we go back and tap into that childlike mentality and awe and wonder, I truly think that our lives would be a bit more mystical, wondrous, and just a little bit happier.
Said. Sure. I mean, and I agree with you. You know, that's one thing I'm always telling just friends and guests that we have is like, I'm one who's grown up. I mean, you can see Cristina probably in my background here. I've got all kinds of kid-like things, statues of comic book characters, and you know, all these things that keep me very kid-like, kid-minded. I like keeping my mind open to a lot of these things. And I'll tell you, like, there was a time where in my early 20s where I was closed off to a lot of this, and over a number of different circumstances, which kind of re up to it. We've been here in this podcast, or a version of this podcast, for about the last 25 years or so. And it's like every time somebody new opens their mind to the world around us and the things that live beyond what is in our physical realm, they're just open to a whole new world. And there's all these questions that pop up and things that they want to know the answers to, which unfortunately we don't all have the answers for yet. But it's this constant battle, unfortunately, between science and religion and make-believe and, you know, what is true and what isn't. And that's something that we're going to have to deal with on a daily basis, I think, pretty much for the rest of our lives, to most likely. But you know,
I feel like, sorry, I'll make this quick. I feel like science is a double-edged sword. I think in many ways, when it comes specifically to the UFO phenomenon, they could be holding the key to disclosure, following the data without bias. Simultaneously, it is because of this always scientific mentality that if it can't be explained, then it doesn't exist and it's just your imagination. So it's like as the years progress, we are finding out new things. We're creating better technology to see the things that our human eye can't, which is incredible. But it's if you don't have data, then it's not real. So it's a double-edged sword with science. I love it. I love following it when I can. I like to see their evolution on how they're addressing the UFO phenomenon, especially when we're looking at like things such as the ghost particle that have been discovered by CERN, just as one example. It's great, but it's like, we need more. We want more. Provide us more information. But also, I got a lot going in my mind today.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of these scientists never let go of that childlike mentality. They're curious. They're always asking questions. That's something that has really been taken out from our school systems, from our lives, especially here in the United States of your answer is A, B, C, or D. Pick one. Do not think outside of the box because you will be wrong. Do not ask any questions. Just take notes. That's it. And so we've lost that constantly wanting to know more and the why. Of course, you have kids that are in that why phase. And they're like 4, 5, 6. Mommy, why is the sky blue? Daddy, why is the grass green? And you want to pull your hair out. You're like, can you just stop asking me? You're so annoying. But as you keep telling them that, no, I can't tell you, no, I don't know, and that rejection kind of sets in, those kids stop asking questions. If we take that away and encourage people, kids and adults to say, ask what you want, there are no dumb questions, we'll answer it to the best of our ability, that will create some of the best human beings, being curious, being skeptical, versus just constantly following a narrative like sheep where they don't ask anything.
So you brought up disclosure. Do you ever think we will have full disclosure? And I'm not saying like our government's coming out and telling us, because they're never going to come out and tell us anything, but extraterrestrials making themselves to the world as a whole? Or do you think it's always going to be kind of like this keeping the secret and we never get answers?
Disclosure will come from the people. It might come from a mass sighting. It might come from science. I am optimistic that we're going to receive some form of disclosure. There have been a lot of rumors that 2025 is the year.
Right.
But we say that every year. Every year.
Sure.
Guys,
Right.
this is the year disclosure is happening. Keep your eyes out. Put your seatbelts on. Get the popcorn. Let's go. And then we're always left incredibly disappointed.
Yep.
I'm optimistic that we're going to get it. I just don't know when. But like you said, Justin, it will never come from the government.
Right.
What do you
Well,
think
it's just
that
like
is?
the end of the world, though, too. Well, we don't know when it's coming. It might come someday, but we don't know when it's coming.
Lots of
That's right.
speculation on when it might come, but
There's speculation, but imagine if everyone knew, there would be such a level, that would be a level of mass panic.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
world ending. Now, there's this idea that there's going to be a mass panic when we get UFO disclosure, like what was witnessed in War of the Worlds. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think we're mentally in a different space and people are a lot more open-minded to it. There have been statements of, oh, it's going to ruin the religious paradigm. I very humbly disagree with that. If you can believe in angels and demons and God and all these different things, I don't see why the mind can't expand just a little bit more to extraterrestrials, interdimensionals. Maybe they're visiting us. Maybe they're ready to hang out with us and tell us that there's so much more to life than your 1 hour commute to work.
I sure hope so.
I hope so too.
Now, when it comes down to just the overall idea of UFOs, what do you think is the biggest controversy regarding UFOs?
Maybe one of the biggest controversies is their agenda. Are they positive or are they negative? I receive a lot of comments and DMs and emails telling me, Cristina, you better stop. You're dealing with demon work. You're dealing with the devil. And I'm thinking, what? Are you okay? It's fine. And then you have others that say, these are our space brothers. They're here to save the planet and cure cancer. They're the best. Be ready with open arms, like an Independence Day with the banners and everything of like, yeah, guys, come on over. I think that's one of the biggest disparities in this field of the mentality of, are they malevolent or are they benevolent? Maybe we're dealing with both. Or maybe they're just completely neutral and just observing us like how biologists do here on planet Earth. They're just kind of seeing how humanity's evolving, what they're doing, and taking notes. Right now, a more prevalent theory, and this is a pretty new theory that's become like publicly acceptable, is the time travel theory. And the crypto extraterrestrial theory as well. But the time travel theory is an interesting one because it's this idea that maybe it's humans, maybe it's a different kind of entity from a different planet that are on some kind of time machine and just observing the human timeline, what has happened over the centuries, and just really just they're watching a movie, figuring stuff out on their own, right? That's an interesting idea and one that I was pretty skeptical about at first. But now I think, if there was, I would be doing the exact same thing. I'd have a TARDIS and I would love to see not only planet Earth, but different planets on how the civilization had evolved and them creating some of their most amazing architecture or some of the most pivotal moments in their history and watch it like a movie. I feel like any curious creature would probably do the same.
Well, I mean, there's this theory out there now too that talking about how UFOs, extraterrestrials, would get here so quickly, that they create a fold or a pocket in time space, and it kind of folds together to basically meld the two areas together to travel. So maybe in a sense that is kind of time travel.
I can see that. That definitely gained traction with the Einstein-Rosen bridge. And I think especially the time that they thought that up until today, we're still considering that. Same with the Alcubierre drive as well. That was created by Alcubierre, a scientist in Mexico, not too long ago, actually, where he says that there's this force field around a craft that's able to bend space-time to quickly get you from one place to another. Our mentality through science is definitely opening up on ideas on how humans and maybe other beings would be able to quickly travel from point A to point B without doing it in a linear fashion. It's unfortunate that in 2025, we're still having this conversation, that we don't have the answers or the technology to kind of figure it out on our own. People in the 60s and 70s thought that we were going to have flying cars in the year 2000. Here we have electric cars.
Right.
That is lame.
And they're not even that good either.
Yeah, it's so lame. I want a flying car so bad. Or at the very least, like flying shoes. That'd be awesome. But we don't have those either.
Well, according to the history of the Jetsons, George Jetson was just born a couple of years ago. So we might be getting close to that. Who knows?
Making me feel old, Justin.
I am 43, so I'm feeling pretty old myself.
Well, I think one thing that, still science doesn't quite understand or want to bother trying to explain. Again, we're talking about folding time. So we're talking about moving a distance from point A to point B, and that distance could be, a million years. But what they're not doing is taking the time to consider the dimensional side of things, the parallel universes where it's all overlapped. And so traveling from point A to point B could literally be a step from one dimension to the next, rather than moving through time and space to get from one place to another. Now, of course, obviously, from what we see here on Earth and what our science tells us, the universe is expanding, and we have no idea when or where or if it ends anywhere. But on the other side, them looking back at us, they might be seeing us one-on-one, 4 dimensions, right here, right now sits to us, and we know it. But they're here and there at the same time. And that's something that we just can't test as of yet, whether or not these parallel universes or interdimensional beings can actually exist, and how one would actually travel through that. So it may not even be so much as bending the space-time continuum, but instead just learning to open the portal that shifts us from one plane to the next. Because again, when we're talking about ghosts, we're talking about spirits, they're living on the same, more or less in the same plane that we are, but they're in a different position, or a different, plane would be a word. They're on a different plane than we are. And so we can't really interact as easily as they might be able to interact with us.
I see what you mean there. That's a great point to make, especially when talking about portals. I would jump through a portal so quick, not even thinking what's on the other side. It's just so exciting and so invigorating. But then imagine the portal police come in and say, do you have authorization? Do you have your portal passport? And that's going to be a whole different mess.
Yeah. You don't know how to handle that because we haven't been trained that yet.
Yep.
Yet.
Right?
Was the
Yes.
word you used.
Yes. Interesting.
One of the last questions I have for you is, a lot of theories have gone around about the theory of the Anunnaki and Nibiru, and possibly the Anunnaki being the origin of the human race. What are your thoughts on those theories?
Okay. How much time do we have?
As much as you need.
Yeah.
Okay. The Anunnaki is a very complex topic. There's a lot to it. And it really started with Zecharia Sitchin.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one that really normalized the idea of the Anunnaki and how it's corresponding with today's history, like the pine cone that has been seen in the hands in Mesopotamia, the same one that's being seen in the Vatican as well. These purses that they're holding have been seen not only by the Anunnaki, but also in India, holding what some people believe to be like a form of battery, or they're holding knowledge. We don't actually have answers. The Anunnaki is so vague. We have such limited information that it's difficult to create a conclusion. But did we originate from them? Maybe some people did. Maybe they did end up mixing DNA and they created different types of humans. That's one theory that has been thrown around in so many sci-fi movies that it makes me question, okay, are these directors and writers trying to condition us, or is it just a great storyline? Okay, which one is it? Because it's such a constant story narrative that we hear over and over and over and over again. Then we can see, okay, well, how does that fit into the timeline of Atlantis? Another topic that I feel like can kind of work hand in hand with the Anunnaki in the sense of which one came first? How did that work out? With Atlantis, it's believed that there were a handful of different races that populated the Earth and then kind of scattered their way through before it was destroyed. Was the Anunnaki one of those civilizations here? Did they share it? Or were they these very territorial species and entities that are ascribed to them? Again, our knowledge is very limited. That it's clear, like it's a cop out, but like we don't know. Just disappointing.
Yeah.
All right. It just all comes down to theory rather than a hypothesis in the end.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Isn't it wonderful to just not know things?
I wish
what
I
keeps me up
didn't
at
know a
night.
lot of things.
But many people want answers. They want the conclusions. And it's difficult because when you say you don't know, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you know nothing. Get out of here."
Right.
But the idea of just being speculative and asking these questions is the best way forward and one of the most healthy ways to conduct a conversation like this.
Right. I think, I think there needs to be just more conversation in general. And unfortunately, one of my favorite things, and I use the word favorite very loosely here, is when somebody has a question and I give them an honest answer and then they argue with me, telling me I'm wrong or fighting with me. I'm like, dude, why? What is the point? Like, why are we doing this? It's one of my favorite things that I've witnessed way too many times. Just random. That was a random thing to add there, but I find it fascinating for sure. It's interesting. People just like to argue something just for the fun of it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Cristina, it is about that time to let you go. So I wanted to give the mic to you to tell everybody where they can find you, find your content. The mic's all yours.
Guys, thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to be here and to talk to you guys, to muse about things, and to have such great questions. Thank you so much. You can find me on my website at ufonews.co, as in co. It is not .com. There you can get international UFO news, where anytime UFO is mentioned anywhere on the internet, it'll go straight to my website. I also write articles on there, keeping you up to date on all the things that are happening in the UFO world, both with history and modern times, how governments internationally are handling and dealing with this topic. You can also find me on YouTube at Cristina Gomez. There is no H in Cristina. Thank you so much.
All right. I'm going to put you in limbo for just a second while we close out. So hang out for just 1 minute. All right, folks. Make sure you're checking out Cristina Gomez and all of the stuff that she's got going on. I loved listening to her talk here on Jim Harold's show, all that great stuff. My hellhound's telling me I better wrap it up. But we don't have a whole lot of announcements right now, right?
No, we don't.
It's
been a slow month, to say the least.
Well, busy for you.
Yes.
Well, slow for the show. Yeah. All right, folks. We got a lot of great guests still lined up. A lot of cool stuff going on. So keep tuning in. As we mentioned at the beginning, this is a pre-recorded show for 107.7 FM New Orleans and the United Public Radio Network. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe no matter where you're listening, watching. We're on YouTube. We're on all of the socials. We are on pretty much any podcatcher you can find. So make sure you do that. Share with everybody that you know, because we love to hear different opinions about all the topics we talk about. But until next week, where you will find us same time, same channel. My name's Justin.
And I'm Eric. Peace.